Hello, and welcome to another episode of Frontlines with Jake and Jóhannes. We have a special guest with us today, Mike Marable. Mike, do you want to give us a quick little introduction about yourself?
Certainly. My name is Mike Marable. I'm one of the OS deployment config manager Intune administrators at the University of Michigan Health System. I've been there for about 16 years, and pretty much anything OS deployment kind of falls in my cubicle.
That's exciting. So you talk about where you work as far as do you have like an endpoint count, like a rough estimate on different things, user count, number of people on your team, different things like that?
Sure. Currently we have about 40, just south of 45,000 endpoints, Windows endpoints. We also have a different group that handles mobile devices, which are just going to be the iOS phones and Android phones. We have about 65,000 employees across the state of Michigan, and our team is about 7 people that handles both application packaging, OS deployment, as well as SCCM administration.
Awesome.
It seems like you probably have a lot of frontline workers, like people who are not sitting in front of a computer all day.
Correct. Being in the health system, the vast majority of our staff are clinicians, doctors, nurses, patient, folks, people that are working directly with patient care. The back-end folks, the people in IT, the people in marketing, human resources, things like that is a much smaller percentage of the group.
Awesome.
Okay. So, can you tell us about, you mentioned that you're using Config Manager in Intune. So what have you been using in the past, and where do you see yourself going in the future with this stuff? Obviously, Intune is going to be involved since you're on the show.
Right. We've been a pure config manager shop for, probably a decade and a half, if not more. We've only recently started investigating Intune. The pandemic and sending everybody working from home was the big driving force behind it. When the pandemic hit and everybody started working from home, suddenly there was a big push to come up with all sorts of what sort of technological solutions could we come up with that would make working from home easier. And suddenly everyone was spinning up projects. Suddenly our cloud management gateway came up to the forefront, and Intune suddenly bubbled up, and ultimately they went with Azure Virtual Desktop. So that suddenly everybody was then focused on getting that up and running, and I'm sure a lot of businesses went through the same sort of thing where it was knee-jerk, rapid rush, get things done, get things working, and settle into operational type work on it. So once everything got settled with that, we started looking at what's long-term, what can we do, and that's when we started to tackle Intune. We started that probably about a year ago. We got the ball rolling for it.
Awesome. In that interim, when you were using Azure Virtual Desktop, was that a viable solution at the time for you? Did it get the job done essentially?
Yes, you got the initial job done. Again, it was sort of a knee-jerk thing. So it was pretty much get something out there that kind of covers 80% of what people need to do. So it's got Office and a lot of the mainline applications that we would be using. And that's what again, it was that 80-20 rule. You get something out there that'll cover 80% of what people need to do when they're working from home. And that's what it did. And we've been running it for coming up on 2 years now. And was like, okay, now what's the next step? We need to think more long term, and that's when we started looking at Intune. One of the big drives for it is coming off of our Windows 7 to Windows 10 migration. We had a huge hardware refresh with that, and the depreciation cycle is coming up where we're still going to have thousands of machines, primarily laptops for the folks that are now working from home. They're going to have to be replaced. And coordinating with users, come on into the office, we're going to swap your machine and do all that. That's really not going to be feasible. So that was kind of a really big selling point for making a move to Intune.
With that in mind, then, are you just shipping the devices straight from the vendor to your users, or?
Initially, we're going to be shipping them from our warehouse, our warehousing facilities. But the ultimate goal is going to be to get them shipped directly from the vendor, directly to the user.
Awesome.
But we're not at that point yet.
Well, you're still saving all that time from having to unbox the device and do it through OSD and all that fun stuff. So you're still saving a ton of time there. That's awesome.
Oh, yes.
So let's go on to the next one here. Were there any like company politics or anything like that that kind of got in the way of like moving to Intune, or did like, you know, the pandemic kind of like really drive home that we need to start looking into this?
No, office politics played a big part. I kind of joke around with some of the guys that the office politics has been the hardest part of the whole project. The technology is easy compared to it. The University of Michigan and the hospital itself, they've been going for almost 200 years. So they have like 2 centuries of business structure, and it's very rigid and very, very, very siloed. So, as new technologies come out, the responsibilities are usually shoehorned into existing groups, and sometimes they make good fits and sometimes they don't. Some of the issues we've run into is that we got our license for our tenant about 3.5 years ago, and then decisions were made by these different groups that are responsible for it, in some cases in a bubble. So there's like security decisions that were made that, now that we're trying to use it day to day, are really hampering our making progress and slowing things down. Like we have one of the issues we have is we have a conditional access rule that's been set up that blocks all cloud apps from offsite. So you've pretty much killed everything, the whole purpose of cloud anything, because you can't autopilot a device in because it can't authenticate, and even then when it's authenticated, it can't activate because everything's blocked. So again, the decisions that were made by some of these teams a couple of years ago, without fully understanding the ramifications of them, have really slowed things down and created a lot of roadblocks for us.
And maybe back then it made sense, like, hey, you need to be on-prem to do everything. But as far as like how things are shaping up in the world now, yeah, definitely reviewing previous policies and things like that need to come into play.
Right.
I would imagine you probably have a lot of regulatory stuff as well.
Correct. There's a lot of, that was one of the initial issues with when they were starting to spin up the Windows Virtual Desktop, was that it was all this concern about, well, we're going to allow users with their own home device through a web portal access WVD, and then there was a lot of concern about, well, what's going to stop people from cut and pasting patient data onto their local their home computer, and then what's the regulatory ramifications of that. So yeah, things tend to move slow. There's a lot of every change that goes into place has to be kind of vetted through a whole laundry list of HIPAA regulations and things like that. So things don't move fast, definitely.
Awesome.
So when it comes to, like, I'm assuming that you are actively working on your Intune migration. So how long do you see, how many resources are you dedicating to this, and how long do you think it will take?
We're in the initial stages of getting our proof of concept set up. Getting that, we started working with Microsoft, and then they partnered us up with a consultant partner of theirs probably about 6 months ago. And we should have our proof of concept ready by the end of March, so about another month and a half. From there, we're going to probably start running pilots during April and May, and then we're hoping to start production in the end of July.
Yeah.
Initially, it's going to be through attrition, because we haven't gotten to the point of planning, okay, how are we going to start moving thousands of machines over to this and start using it? So
well, the
that's,
refresh cycle you talked about earlier is probably a good point to start at.
yeah, that's going to be the big driving force. Is going to be that hardware refresh. If you want to think about it, the second phase we're going to be working with this partner is going to be coming up with an actual migration plan, because the current target of what they're planning on using for the using this for with the hardware refresh is going to be coming in about 19,000 machines over the next 3 years. That's still going to leave. Yeah, and that's still going to leave, over 20,000 machines that are going to be, for the time being, purely managed, continuing to be managed by Config Manager. And so we're going to come up with some plan of migrating those over. So that's going to be tackled during a second phase, a second engagement with this consulting company.
So when you mentioned consulting company, when you engaged Microsoft, did they initially get you kind of going with fast track, or did they give you like an FTE, or like what was the process with that?
At first, it was through a cycle of different Premier FTEs.
Okay.
Pretty much doing a lot of, like one-on-one meetings. Kind of here's what's possible. Sort of kind of fishing out what we're looking to do and what would best fit for us, as far as working out the best use cases. And then once they got that foundation set, they paired us up with one of their partners, and then they sort of took over, and it went into an official engagement, and several months of information gathering, and then with the regular consulting process at that point.
Yeah, especially with an organization of your size, you definitely don't want to miss any little detail there during the process. So that makes sense. So, as far as like the human element of things, has gone, like as far as like user buy-in, like you're obviously at the early stages of it, but has been like adoption been pretty positive so far, or have you run into any roadblocks from the user end, perspective?
There's been a lot there has been a lot of positive interest in it. People, we have a pretty tech savvy population of staff. Even just clinicians. I mean, they're pretty tech savvy. There's a lot of interest. They may not understand exactly what Autopilot and Intune is, but they get the concept that you're not going to have to VPN in all the time, or if something goes wrong with your computer, you're not going to have to drive on into the office and sit there around and wait for a desktop support tech to re-image it or anything like that. Or when it does come time to refresh the device, or something breaks on the device, you're not going to have to shuttle back and forth or ship things back and forth. That just a box is going to show up on be delivered by UPS or something, and you just follow some instructions, and everything will be taken care of for you. They're really enthusiastic about something like that.
Awesome.
So you have a fairly diverse group of people that, like, your users are like you said, like there are doctors, there are frontline workers, office people. So what kind of licensing model have you gone with this? Is it like a mixture of everything, or have you just gone E5 for everybody?
We're running an A5.
An A5.
Well, all of our licensing works through the campus itself. The University of Michigan campus proper handles all licensing, and then we kind of piggyback on top of that.
That makes sense.
So we're running an A5. So we kind of have the keys to everything eventually.
So I bet that makes everything a little bit easier for you.
Yes.
You don't need to worry about any licensing. Oh, everybody, E5.
Or
A5
fight for
everybody.
extra licensing or anything like that. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, we wanted to switch to Teams, and it wasn't like, oh, well, now we got to go buy extra for this, or oh, hey, we want to enable this feature. Well, that's going to cost more.
Everything's just kind of included at that point. That's great.
Yeah, that being able to go to the A5 was a big advantage for us.
So you mentioned Autopilot. So what deployment method did you end up going with? Was it Azure AD joining or hybrid Azure AD join? And like, which one and how did it work up? What's the big plan?
Well, the plan is going to be just doing a straight Azure AD.
Okay.
There is some concerns about applications that aren't going to work without having a local on-prem Active Directory presence. Like we have a fairly huge pipe. We got about between 9,000 and 10,000 devices that use they're clinical devices. So they're the things that are in patient rooms and the nursing workstations and things like that. They use a single sign-on application that the vendors already told us it's going to require a local on-prem connection, a local on-prem presence in AD. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So right there, nearly a fourth of our machines are just not going to be eligible, for this sort of Intune management until the vendor, comes up with a straight Azure AD solution. Otherwise, we have a few pockets of applications that we, through application compat testing, we'll shake out. But we're really fighting tooth and nail not to go with a hybrid AD join.
Save yourself the hassle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
and for those apps that you have that like require that on-prem, I mean, it sounds like previously you mentioned you did AVD or WVD. You kind of already got a solution there as far as virtualizing those applications, so they still have that on-premise connection. So that might alleviate some pain there.
Plus, a lot of them are like I said, because they're clinical machines, they're not going to go off-site. So it's kind of, if it's not broke, don't fix it, sort of thing.
Makes sense.
But I will say it is commendable that you guys have the, how do I put this? That you're able to accept that there's just a segment of your endpoints that might not be able to move. So we'll just keep them there and we'll move the rest. It seems like a very common.
Like Mike mentioned, it's the 80-20 rule. Worry about the 80%, deal with the 20% after. Like, there's too many people out there that's like, oh, I can't do this one thing for my org that affects, maybe 5, 10, whatever percentage of machines. And they just, nope, I can't do that.
It doesn't have to be an all or nothing big bang.
Yeah.
Cutover.
Exactly.
Find the use cases that best fit and go with them.
Exactly. So you mentioned applications that require that on-prem access. Are there any other things that you have to worry about, as far as on-premise access goes, and do you guys have any plans on how to handle that?
We're working on it. There's access. We still have map network drives to our on-prem NAS. I feel guilty in saying that we're just going to continue to use our on-demand VPN connection so that users can connect and make the connection. But, and it's probably not the most elegant solution, but it's going to get the job done. And, it'll be something we can revisit later on down the road because, there's other solutions that would make that work. But it's, unfortunately, it's just a matter of prioritization. I mean, I'm sure... every IT shop's got that. The list of work that needs to be done is far exceeds staffing. So it's always going to be what can we tackle and what's just going to have to be put on the back shelf for a while.
Yeah, take it one step at a time. Don't do everything at once. That's how issues crop up. Right.
It's going to be just what we're tackling alone is going to already it's going to create support tickets. I mean, it's inevitable. If we started throwing in all sorts of extra things that we had to do kind of on a rush because we're all pressed for time, that's just going to cause more issues. It's just going to be one more thing that could break. And if it does, then it's going to be a black eye on the whole project. It's going to be like, well, I mean, it's junk. It doesn't work well. So you tackle what's going to be successful and you come back and revisit the rest later.
Well, I also imagine when you look at industry and the amount of devices you have too, I'm sure there's about 1 billion printers out there too that you have to deal with.
Yeah, for sure.
Everybody's favorite thing, right? Printers.
Yeah, there's like a whole separate project just devoted to just how we're going to manage printers, because it used to be, we had this in-house built database, and it would, part of its, one of its tables was lining up workstation with printers, and we'd had this, PowerShell script that would go through and it would, what printers are assigned to this device, and it would install the drivers and the setup, all that out the door. So, they're coming up with an actual off-the-shelf solution to do printer management.
Awesome.
And then immediately they were like, okay, is this going to work with an Azure connected device? And all of a sudden they kind of gave us some blank stares and said, oh, we'll get back to you on that. We need to look. Yeah. Again, it gets back to the silos.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, regarding like your future plans, like what are your, like after this, what's going to be your next big project related to Intune and all that, like the whole cloud thing?
Is there anything beyond Intune? It's gonna be an ongoing. We're probably gonna spend the next few years moving everything else over to Intune. Because once we get this first batch done, it's going to be a matter of going through and again, once like that single sign-on vendor says, okay, here's the version, here's the solution we have for just an Azure device. Okay, then we start tackling those, and then we have, probably a few thousand machines that, like some display board devices, which would be a perfect fit for Intune managed, but it's just going to be, again, it's prioritization. It's like, let's get a big bang chunk done, and then start working through some of these other use case scenarios. And then once we got things all ported over, it's going to be, okay, what other, like Endpoint Analytics would be a great thing that we would love to turn on once we get our feet under ourselves and are able to, stand up stably, to be able to tackle something like that,
Well, and you mentioned Endpoint Analytics. Are there any other features that you're kind of looking forward to like get your hands in and actually start working on once you've kind of got that first initial rollout going?
I wish I could see that far into the future. To me, the analytics would be great. That's something I've been wanting to get involved into for quite some time. Even before we started tackling Intune, it was something that I always thought was going to be very advantageous for us. So that's my personal big goal for after we get our feet settled on solid ground with this.
Well, it sounds like we're going to have you back once you've gotten through that initial group, I guess you could say, that first group, to kind of tell us how it went.
So much deer in the headlights sort of thing.
Yeah.
What am I doing?
Well, awesome. Was there anything else you feel like you want to include at all, Mike?
Oh, I don't know. I'm still, like I said, we're still on the uphill climb on this. It's every day we're coming up with new things, like never even knew that. Something new we're gonna have to
it's never ending.
No.
What would you say to people who claim that they can't do what you're doing right now because, hey, they work for a hospital or whatever, or in a similar environment? They boldly claim, well, we can't do it.
They can. It's a matter of it's a tough battle. One, you gotta identify the use cases, but if they were like us and they've spent years and years and years working with Config Manager, it takes a lot of work to kind of wrap your head around the way Intune operates.
Mm-hmm.
So, and as I was would be doing demos and attending meetings and all this internally, it was a lot of time spent explaining, lining up, comparing and contrasting Config Manager with Intune. Okay, everybody's real familiar how to do collections and deployments and task sequences and things like that, and custom MOFs and hardware inventory collection, and everybody's real used to that. And then you start talking about, okay, you don't have that with Intune. You don't have folders of collections. You don't have you don't have this hardware inventory that you can start scooping in registry keys and start building collections out of it. Once people kind of wrap their head around, okay, it's a new thing, and I got to think of it as a different process, then it's a little easier to start tackling, okay, what use cases do I have that would work in this? And in our case, it was like, okay, we have thousands of machines we're going to have to start replacing for people at home. And I mean, Autopilot, that's what Autopilot was built for. It's like, staff, let's just ship the machine to the end user, and let's make it nice and easy for them. They just open the box and away you go. And everything's handled through the internet. They don't have to do any special VPN connections. They don't, it's easy for the user. And it takes time away, it saves time for the device support folks. Like you were mentioning earlier, they don't have to unbox the machine, fire off a task sequence, rebuild it, box it all up, ship it off to the user. They don't have to do that. It saves time for everybody. So
frees them up to do other tasks. Dive into more Intune stuff.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your time, Mike. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
And obviously, we'll include all your information down below. If anyone has any questions, for Mike, we can pass them along. Feel free to leave them down in the comments below. But other than that, thanks for your time and have a great one.